Robert. I'm completely soaked through. But whether it's from the rain, or from your touch, I honestly can't tell anymore. Please, let me in. She spoke the words, and in the heavy silence that followed, he said nothing at all. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his shirt. It was a pre-dawn morning, with a sudden downpour hammering against the roof. We were in a small, forgotten storage room behind the clubhouse at the driving range. A drenched shirt, a whispered confession, a boss and his employee. That forbidden moment began right there, on the deserted grounds of the golf course. How on earth did the two of us end up spending that night together? Well, the story starts a few days earlier. It was the day of the first official company golf outing of the season. I remember climbing onto the shuttle bus, my stomach churning with anxiety. In our company, these golf events had become an unspoken, mandatory tradition. You just didn't miss them. And since this one was organized by Robert Davis himself, the head of the sales division, I had no choice but to go. It was my first invitation since being promoted to manager. My name is Laura, and I'm 45 years old. I work as a team manager in the sales planning department of a respectable mid-sized corporation. I'd been with the company for over 12 years by then. I was comfortable with my job, knew it inside and out, but these kinds of social functions still made me feel awkward and out of place. I had barely ever held a golf club in my life, and there I was, at 7 in the morning, standing at the first tee box, the fairway stretching out like an endless green carpet of judgment. That's not how you hold the club, Laura. Straighten your back a little. The comments from my colleagues were laced with barely concealed laughter. Their thoughtless jokes started to weigh on my shoulders, making them feel heavy and stiff. I swung. The club hit the ground with a dull thud, and the ball skittered pathetically off to the side. Someone behind me let out a chuckle. Someone else just turned their head away in secondhand embarrassment. I forced a smile onto my face, trying to pretend it didn't bother me as I lowered my head. Just then, a gentle voice came from behind me. It's all right. Everyone's like that at first. It was Robert Davis. He had quietly walked up beside me and gently adjusted my stance. His hand, resting on the small of my back to guide my posture, was surprisingly warm. I flinched, and seeing my reaction, he gave a small, kind smile. Just relax, he said. On my first round, I couldn't even hit the ball. I was heavier back then, too, so I could barely even twist my waist. It sounded like a joke, but his voice held a genuine sincerity that cut through my embarrassment. I gave a small nod. In that moment, for the very first time, I felt a wave of gratitude toward this man. That simple phrase, the warmth from his fingertips, it lingered with me for a strangely long time. Was it just simple kindness? Or was it something a little closer, a little more personal? For the entire week after we returned to the office, I felt a heaviness settle over me. It wasn't a physical ache, it was the weight of everyone's eyes on me. So, Laura, feel like you've loosened up those shoulders swinging that driver? She might not have hit the ball, but she sure looked good standing next to Mr. Davis. In the hallway before a meeting, in the elevator during the lunch rush. I had to endure the same jokes over and over. Some people said it to my face, while others just exchanged knowing glances and smirks. With every comment, the gratitude I'd felt on the course that day slowly curdled into a feeling of shame. So I started avoiding him. Intentionally. Whenever I saw an opportunity for our paths to cross, I'd turn down a different hallway or duck into an empty office. I avoided making eye contact. But then, on Friday afternoon, just before the end of the day, Robert Davis walked over to my desk. "Laura, can we talk for a minute?" At his words, the heads of my nearby colleagues snapped up in unison, their eyes instantly fixed on us. I grabbed my bag and followed him into an empty conference room. The blinds were half drawn, casting long, dusky shadows across the table. It was 5 o'clock. "You've been uncomfortable lately, haven't you?" Robert asked, getting straight to the point. I just kept my head down and nodded silently. "I'm sorry," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I realize now, my helping you like that, for an employee, it might have felt like pressure." The moment he said the words, "my helping you," I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. "No, it wasn't like that," I said, forcing a smile. "I guess I just stood out a little that day." He let out a soft sigh. "Golf," he said, changing the subject. "Are you interested in learning for real?" I looked up at him, surprised by the unexpected offer. "I know you must have felt embarrassed out on the course. I can help you. The driving range here is empty in the early mornings. We could just do some short sessions, when no one else is around." A heavy silence filled the room. I hesitated. I was worried it would just create more gossip, and honestly, I wasn't even sure what I wanted myself. But for some reason, the memory of his hand on my back that morning kept replaying in my mind. "Okay," I found myself saying. "Just for a little while, in the mornings." He nodded, a small, gentle smile touching his lips. "It'll help with your work, you'll see. You'd be surprised how much confidence in a meeting can start with a confident swing." It was an excuse. We both knew it. This wasn't just about work. That evening, on my way home, I must have turned my phone screen on and off a dozen times. There were no new messages, but for some reason, I found myself waiting, hoping to hear from him. My gratitude was slowly blossoming into a cautious curiosity, and that curiosity was now turning into a small, fluttering excitement. At 5 o'clock the next morning, I carefully pushed open the door to the indoor practice facility. Under the stark fluorescent lights, the green turf mat stretched out in silent rows. And there, in the corner, was Robert, already stretching. He was here. "You're early," I said. "It's a habit," he replied. "I like it best when there's no one else here." An awkward air hung between us. After his offer in the conference room, we hadn't spoken or texted, but just as he'd suggested, I had shown up. Robert silently handed me a practice iron, and I took it, my hands feeling clumsy as I tried to remember the grip. "Straighten your back. Keep your wrists steady. Grip a little lower." He came up behind me. I could feel his breath, warm and close, on the back of my neck. I could even hear the soft sound of him inhaling. That's how near we were. "Relax your arms, just like that." His hands covered mine, gently repositioning them on the club. As his fingers wrapped around the inside of my elbow, I felt a slight tremor run through my shoulders. "It's okay," he said softly. "That's good. Right there." "Oh, right. I'll focus," I stammered, lowering my head slightly. My eyes were fixed on the ground, but every single one of my senses was focused on the man standing behind me. He didn't say anything else. But his hands moved slowly, tracing a path down to the small of my back. It was all under the guise of correcting my posture, but the movement was so slow, so deliberate, that it was impossible not to be aware of something more. I found myself taking a sharp breath in, then letting it out in a long, slow sigh. In that dizzying moment when his fingertips brushed against my skin, I lifted my head and looked at his reflection in the dark window in front of us. Our eyes met for maybe 2 seconds, but in that brief instant, we both knew what the other was thinking without a single word being spoken. "Why don't you try a swing?" Robert said, breaking eye contact first. "Okay." I carefully settled back into my stance. The club whispered against the turf as it connected with the ball. But the sound of the swing faded quickly, while the warmth of his body behind me lingered on my skin for a long, long time. Today's lesson had left its mark not on my technique, but on my heart. I was beginning to understand why he had approached me so carefully. And I could no longer deny that a part of me, a very deep part, had been hoping he would. It was a Sunday morning. We had quietly arranged to play a round together. Since it wasn't an official company event, we didn't have to worry about anyone's prying eyes. The light rain that had fallen at dawn seemed to be clearing up under the morning sun, but without warning, dark clouds began to gather again. We were somewhere around the 6th hole when the first drops began to fall. By the time we made it back to the clubhouse, a full-blown summer downpour was raging. The spacious lounge was completely empty. Even the staff seemed to have retreated to a break room somewhere. A deep silence fell over the space, making it feel like we were the only 2 people left in the world. "That came out of nowhere," I said, shaking the rain from my hair. Robert leaned his wet golf bag against the wall and handed me a small towel. "Are you okay?" "Yes, I'm fine. I didn't get too wet. But my shirt was already clinging to my back." I carefully sat down on one of the leather sofas and stared out the window for a moment, saying nothing. The sound of the rain drumming on the roof created a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Robert sat down next to me, quietly catching his breath. "Laura," he said softly. "Yes?" "Why did you never get married?" It was a sudden question, but it didn't surprise me. On a day like this, in a quiet place like this, the question actually felt perfectly natural. "I was engaged once, a long time ago," I said, my voice steady. "But in the end, it just wasn't right. The timing, the person, neither of them worked out." I said it calmly, but the words were heavy with the weight of time past. "You're divorced," I heard. "Yeah," he confirmed. "We weren't married for very long. We both used work as an excuse to let each other drift away." Robert idly spun the bottle of water in his hand. His voice was low and quiet, but I could hear the echo of regret in it. "Life is a strange thing, isn't it?" I mused. "With a golf swing, you're not supposed to use force. But in a relationship, if you don't apply any force, it just falls apart." A brief smile passed between us. But it didn't last long. The silence returned, only this time, it didn't feel awkward anymore. It felt comfortable. Robert turned his head and watched me as I tried to fix my damp hair. His gaze was no longer that of a boss looking at his employee. I felt it, too. I felt the angle of his stare change, the intensity of it. Outside, the rain was still pouring down, soaking the golf course in a deep, glistening green. But inside, the air between us was slowly shifting. A tension, one that needed no words, was seeping into the space, slowly and unmistakably. A few days later, another executive-level golf outing was scheduled as an extension of a company-wide wellness event. This one was much more official. There were more people, but Robert and I were assigned to the same foursome. Thanks to our lessons, my swing had stabilized, and I was starting to hit the ball pretty well. Instead of the panicked, flubbed shots from before, I could now swing my driver with confidence. Wow, Laura, your game has really improved. Who's been teaching you? Did you sign up for lessons at a club? My colleague's words sounded less like compliments and more like thinly veiled accusations. I just smiled and deflected the questions. But I knew that from now on, people would be paying less attention to my skills and more attention to my relationship with Robert. On the way back from the clubhouse after the round, Robert was unusually quiet. He didn't sit next to me on the bus, and at the post-game lunch, he deliberately sat at the opposite end of the table. I couldn't understand it. Was he suddenly trying to distance himself, or had this always been the distance between us, and I had just been imagining things? The next day at the office, he offered nothing more than a brief nod. Laura, I've reviewed that document. Yes, I emailed it to you this morning. His tone was formal, professional. There was no room for anything else. The man whose hands had corrected my posture, whose eyes had met mine with a shared smile, was gone. I sat at my desk, staring at a spreadsheet, moving the mouse back and forth without really seeing it. Robert's gaze, the feel of his hands during our morning practices, the heavy silence in the clubhouse during the rainstorm, every scene played over and over in my mind. Was this wrong? Did I cross a line? Or was there never a line to begin with, and I had just invented one all by myself? For the first time, I realized how large the feeling of anxiety could loom inside me. The feelings were definitely there. And because someone was afraid they might grow even larger, he was taking a step back. And the other person was left standing on the edge, swaying silently, all alone. That morning, I stood in front of the door to the driving range, hesitating for a long time. Even before I opened it, a strange, sinking feeling had settled in the pit of my stomach. For the past few days, Robert had been noticeably cautious. He no longer struck up conversations in the hallway or during meetings. The private glances and shared smiles had vanished completely. I pushed the door open. The practice facility was as quiet as ever. Robert was on one of the mats, methodically practicing his swing. "You're here," he said, turning his head just slightly to acknowledge me. It was a short greeting, completely devoid of emotion. Feeling like I'd swallowed a stone, I picked up an iron and took my place on the mat next to his. "Your grip looks fine," he commented. "You seem to have gotten used to it." His tone was polite, but it felt strangely distant. He didn't come closer to adjust my hands, nor did he place a hand on my back or shoulders to guide me. I took a swing. The ball flew straight enough, but my heart felt heavy as lead. I had a pretty good idea why he was keeping this awkward distance. So, unable to bear it any longer, I asked. "Robert, it feels like you've been avoiding me lately." He stopped his swing mid-motion. The club, paused at the top of his backswing, slowly came down. Without turning to face me, he answered. "I'm worried about making things uncomfortable for you, Laura. I'm not sure if this is the right thing to do." His voice was firm, but the hesitation hidden within it hurt even more. Ever since that day, I keep feeling like I'm crossing a line. I just stared at him, speechless. I never knew how distant a few simple words could feel. In the space he had created by taking a step back, I could see words like caution, responsibility, and reality. But his retreat only made my own feelings more complicated. Because watching someone pull away not because they don't care, but because they care too much, that was a special kind of pain. Silence fell between us again. This time, it was a void that no words could easily fill. It was a Friday night, the night of a team dinner. I had debated whether to go, but at the last minute, I decided it was better to just show up and keep the peace. The dinner itself was ordinary. But as people started to leave one by one, eventually, it was just Robert and me left at a quiet corner table in a local bar and grill. Outside, a soft spring rain had begun to fall. The sound of the raindrops tapping against the restaurant's awning stirred something emotional inside me. I looked at him for a long moment, then spoke in a small voice. Ever since that day, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. About your hands, Robert. About the cool morning air, that quiet driving range. Robert silently put down his glass of whiskey. His eyes were unsteady, but his lips were pressed into a firm line. I took a shallow breath and continued. If what we're doing is so wrong, are we supposed to just keep running away from it forever? At those words, Robert lifted his head, and our eyes locked. I've been thinking about that, too, he said. His short reply was followed by a long silence. Then, without another word, Robert stood up from the table. Want to go to the clubhouse? To get out of the rain? I nodded, and without an umbrella, we walked out into the night. The rain grew heavier. By the time we arrived, we were both completely drenched. The lights in the golf course's practice facility were off, but the door to a small storage room next to it was faintly ajar. Robert went in first, and I followed him inside. The space was small and dark. The air was thick with humidity. Our wet shirts, our held breaths. We just looked at each other for a moment before slowly moving closer. He reached out first, his hand gently cupping my cheek. I leaned into his touch, and then his lips met mine. It was light at first, a hesitant touch, then a pause, and then he kissed me again, deeper this time. My thin shirt was soaked through, revealing the outline of my skin beneath. Robert's fingertips slid down my spine, coming to rest on the small of my back. One by one, the buttons of my shirt came undone. I didn't resist. As his lips traced a path down my neck, a soft sigh escaped my own. In that moment, I whispered, Robert, I'm completely soaked through. And I don't know if it's from the storm outside, or from the warmth of your hand right now. I looked him straight in the eye, letting him see everything I felt. All this time, all this waiting. I can't do it anymore. Please, I breathed, don't make me wait any longer. The words were a signal, melting away all the hesitation that had stood between us. Robert took a sharp breath, his arms wrapping around my waist, pulling me tightly against him. We didn't speak again. Wet clothes and skin, lips against lips, ragged breaths tangling in the small, dark room. That night, neither of us stopped. We allowed ourselves to share that warmth, that connection. Outside, the rain fell without pause. The glass of the clubhouse windows slowly fogged over with the heat of our breath. It was desire. It was a warmth born from loneliness. It was a midnight answer to a question we had been forbidden to ask. A few days after that night, I started to feel the strange looks in the hallways at work. Outside the conference room, by the coffee machine, in the elevator, no one said anything directly, but I could feel it in my bones. I was the subject of whispers. Laura seems to be spending a lot of time with Mr. Davis lately. Well, her team's numbers are up. I heard there's talk of a promotion. The whole atmosphere changed after that golf outing, you know? Those kinds of comments were traded quietly over coffee cups. And I knew that beneath the light-hearted tone, there was a kernel of truth. The memory of that night was a quiet, deep warmth inside me, but the reality of the office was making that memory feel heavier each day. I found myself printing a document twice by mistake, rereading an email after I'd already sent it. For the first time, I was acutely aware that any small mistake, any action that drew the slightest attention, could become fodder for the gossip mill. Then, just before the end of the day, Robert quietly called me over. "Can we talk for a minute?" It wasn't the conference room this time, and it wasn't the driving range. He was waiting for me in the hallway by the first-floor emergency staircase. We stood side by side without a word. The setting sun cast long orange rays through the narrow window, and his expression looked unusually resolute. "Laura," he began, his voice low. "I think it's best if we stop this here." The words were short, but their meaning was heavy and clear. "You know what I mean, don't you?" The looks, the whispers around the office. "I can handle it, but I'm worried you'll get hurt." I lowered my head. It wasn't that I didn't understand why he was saying it. But the words still felt like a cold blade twisting in my chest, because I was the one who was still in love, not the one who had decided to give up. "Yes," I managed to say. "I understand." I turned away without looking up, without seeing his face. We both knew those words weren't what I truly felt, but in that moment, it was the only way either of us could endure it. He watched me for a long time as I pushed open the emergency door and disappeared down the long, empty corridor. The words had stopped. The distance had returned. But our feelings were left hanging, with nothing finished at all. Saturday morning. I woke up long before my alarm. I had nothing scheduled, no one to meet, but I quietly picked up my golf bag and left the house. The wind was unusually calm that day. The air was crisp and clear, as if the world was trying to tell me everything was okay. The golf course was strangely quiet when I arrived. Neither of our names were on the tee sheet, but we both showed up at the same time. We naturally got our clubs and walked to the first tee together. There were no greetings, no shared glances, but for that moment, just knowing we were both there was enough. The first ball I hit flew straight and true down the fairway. Robert gave a silent nod of approval, and I said nothing as I walked to my ball. For 18 holes, we barely spoke. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind, the soft crunch of our shoes on the grass, and the gentle thud of the balls landing on the green. We always walked about half a step apart on the fairway, and we never made eye contact after finishing a putt. That distance was both heartbreaking and, in a strange way, comforting. As we finished the last hole, I was packing my clubs away when I spoke quietly. "So now we go back to just being a boss and an employee, right?" Robert turned and looked at me. His expression was a mixture of two conflicting emotions, the conviction that this was how it had to be, and the deep-seated desire for it to be anything but. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. With that one small gesture, everything was said. On the path back to the clubhouse, we walked in different directions. I headed toward the parking lot, he disappeared toward the pro shop. But after a few steps, I turned back to look. I saw his silhouette in the distance, the way he paused to readjust the strap on his golf bag, the momentary stillness in his shoulders. And in that instant, I knew. Even without words, we would always remember each other. After that day, we reverted to being Mr. Davis and Ms. Adams in our work emails. But in my heart, he remained the man whose name I had never truly finished calling. On Sunday afternoon, I found myself back at the driving range, alone. It was the one place that felt familiar enough to soothe my unsettled heart. Hitting balls, collecting them, hitting them again, I tried to lose myself in the simple, mindless repetition. But with every swing, I saw Robert's face, heard his voice, felt his hands, remembered the look in his eyes. Suddenly, I heard a familiar voice from behind me. "Still working hard, I see." I turned around. It was Robert, wearing a baseball cap pulled down low. Even though it had only been a few days, it didn't feel awkward at all. He walked over to the mat next to mine without a word, and I quietly took my address position again. After a few more shots, he spoke, his voice filled with a hesitation that seemed to have been building for days. "After that day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About your expression, about what you said." I lowered my club and looked at him. "And I just want to see you." That one sentence revealed everything he had been holding back. A quiet moment passed between us. Then, with a gentle smile, Robert asked, "So, should we play today? Together?" In that instant, I felt the tension release from my shoulders, and for the first time in what felt like forever, a genuine warmth spread across my face. We walked together toward the end of the driving range. A soft breeze was blowing, and our two shadows slowly merged into one on the green turf. For now, we might still be a boss and an employee. The whispers at work might still be sharp. But we had decided to walk together again. This time, we wouldn't hesitate. We wouldn't run from what we felt. From now on, our rounds of golf wouldn't be about work. They would be about us. I had a feeling that the wind on the next hole would feel just a little bit different. Our new beginning had started, quietly, but with a certainty that felt as real and solid as the ground beneath our feet.